to another episode in our Green Thumb Gardening Secret Series. Today we're going to be talking about planting garlic. Let's get going.
One of the first questions people tend to ask is, when do I plant? Not spring. You want to plant in the fall. So when specifically in the fall? It depends on your region. When we lived in southern Wisconsin, we found through a little bit of experimentation that planting October 15th plus or minus 15 days was our ideal time. Now that we live in the mountains of North Carolina, we found that November 30th plus or minus 15 days is our ideal time. Why? Well, once you get it in the ground, garlic is going to send down its roots first. And about 4 to 6 weeks into it, it's going to have roots sent out and nice, solid, strong root system and not too much top growth. If you plant it and give it earlier than that and give it longer than that, it's going to have so much top growth that gets damaged or destroyed once you get really cold weather. You want the garlic to have enough time to get its roots established and just a tiny little bit of top growth started so it can take off when warmer spring weather starts to come around. And 4 to 6 weeks ends up being your optimal time. If you live in a place where your ground never freezes and you're not afraid of any really 20-degree temperatures that are going to last for several days or even just several hours, plant it, late November, mid-December to mid-December, anytime in there, you're fine. Just so it gets a good chance to get started to really take off once it comes spring. And you'll notice in springtime, your garlic leaves will be up and it can have even heavy frost and they'll be just fine.
First thing you're going to want to do is prepare your site. Loosen your soil just like you would for planting anything. Once your site is prepared, grab your garlic. If you're using previous year's stock, grab the best, the biggest, healthiest heads you can find. Next, break out the individual bulbs. Break out the individual cloves. Just dig in there, just like you're getting garlic broken up for anything. Set them in a little pile for each variety. The most important thing about planting garlic is giving it plenty of space. I've tried plenty of spacings over the years, and what I finally settled on is about 9 inches. In the garden, I like to use my hands as a measuring device. So I know my onions are planted this far apart. I know my garlic is planted this far apart. With my hands, that's about 9 inches. So from an edge of where you want, go about half that distance. There's your first spot. Notice on every clove, there's a spot where this one even has, you can see little roots coming out. And then the other side is pointed. You see a little point coming up the top. You can see on these other varieties, one side is definitely pointed. Root side down, pointed side up. Grab it in your hand just like this, just like you're grabbing the bulb with the pointed side up, and shove it down in your first spot. And I go about to where the soil is somewhere between that knuckle and that knuckle. Usually probably soil right up to that. And don't cover it over yet, because that's letting you know where to put all the next ones. Measure about that far. You can see why it's nice to be able to use your hands for spacing in the garden. Measure about that far. I'll never walk in this soil, so I'll come around to the other side to finish that row. Because I didn't cover it over, I know right where I'm starting. About that far, there's my spot. About that far, there's my spot. And here, I guess I'm going to switch this one because this is a bigger bulb right there. It'll do better. This one's closer to the edge, it won't do quite as well. Same thing for your space between your rows. You want about that same distance. But I like to also offset my spacing. So here we go, that far between the row, but I'll go right in between these cloves of the other row. So I'm right here instead. And now that far, which should be right in between those two cloves. You'll see in the book, I describe this more. It's just called offset spacing. It's a great way to space stuff in the garden and make best use of your overall space. Everything around it has a circle of exactly the amount of space that it needs. So that distance right here, and I still make sure my row is still about that far that I'm not wandering. This one got a little bit off. It should be a little bit that way. And it's fine to correct it, just move it over in the soil. It's not a big deal at all. About that far, see I'm right in between those two. And I'll go back with another row. That far over, that distance there, that far. Now I'm back on my first row, same distance, but I'm still just measuring up with my hand. I'm not the right distance over though. That row is right in here, where it should be. Right there, and you can see it's nice to have those cloves so I can know, yeah, okay, it's just a double check. I'm right about where I should be. When I measure, I just make a little divot with my thumb. It tells me about where I am. And you continue that with all your varieties. You can still see my divots where I planted each one of the cloves, and that's important. Learned over time. If you cover them over before now, you're always like, oh crap, where is that row? And it's helpful because now we're going to put in these. We just want to mark each row so we can keep our varieties so we know what they are. That thing's probably going to run out any time, huh? Now that you have them in and labeled, time to just spread some dirt back over. You don't need to know where they are anymore. You marked them out. And you wouldn't have to label them, but we found it's nice. Final step in this process is mulch, and your best mulch is straw. You want to really fluff up your straw all over your whole area. You don't want to leave, you know how straw comes off a lot of times in these kind of densely packed chunks. You want to really fluff that up. Reason for that is your leaves, when they come up in the spring, they'll struggle if everything is matted. If the garlic leaves, that's why you don't use something like leaves for mulch, because they end up making this dense mat, and the garlic leaves are trying to come up through it. This gives a nice place for them to just kind of weave their way through and poke up, unless you have a really densely packed mat. But a mulch like leaves would give you this almost like a sealed surface, like newspaper would. They just mat together, and then the garlic leaves can't come up through it. They can't poke through, and they'll eventually end up dying if it's too matted. You just want to make sure it's nice and stays nice and loose. Plus the looseness helps insulate it. You know, it's those air pockets. So how much mulch? About 6 inches, plus or minus a couple inches. You probably don't want less than 4, you probably don't want more than 8. Some people say to mulch really thickly, like 12 inches. We've found that the garlic leaves in the spring have a hard time making it through mulch that's quite that thick. 6 inches will give you plenty of insulation. If you're in a place where it snows, that'll provide additional insulation. If you're in a place that it doesn't, you probably aren't also getting that much cold, so 6 inches is enough insulation. And not so much that the leaves have a hard time getting through it. This will pack down over time just from the weather, you know, beating on it, and it will be next year, say, a nice good solid 3-4 inches of mulch, and we'll keep all the weeds off of this. Definitely as it grows, keep weeds out of it if anything makes it, if any of them make it through the straw. But the straw itself keeps you a nice weed-free area as well. And that's it. Sit back, let it grow. It's that easy. I mean, even with filming, this took us maybe an hour. So you break off your cloves, you know, get the garlic that you want, break off your cloves, put them in, root down, spaced about 9 inches apart. Label them if you want to. Spread the soil back over them, and making sure they're about, you know, that deep to that deep. Cover them with about 6 inches of straw, plus or minus a couple inches, and you're done. I'm under the real strong conviction that none of this is that hard to do, but if you don't know that, it can seem daunting. That's why I want to do these real simple videos. You can see how easy it is. You just have to stay open to growing. Let's get going. You can see why it's nice to be able to use your hands for spacing in the garden. Measure about that far.